Hello, CISW members and anyone who may be tuning in from wherever you are, wherever you're at, for another webinar here. We are getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here. We do have a poll for you. So if you want to tune in and let us know where you're tuning in from, that would be excellent. My name is Alexandra Zanis, and I am the Social Policy and Communications Coordinator here at the CISW. I feel like it's been a little bit since we've all connected, so I'm so happy to see your virtual names. Please feel free to use that chat function to let us know comments about the presentation as we go through it, where you're tuning in from. And then if you wanted to use that Q&A tab for any dedicated questions, we have a lot of opportunities for Q&A throughout the presentation where you can pick the brains of our incredible presenters. So feel free to use that Q&A tab in the widgets on the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. You don't have to wait till the end. You can type your questions throughout the presentation and we'll compile them and ask our panelists. I am so excited to be here today. I think what an incredible topic for the time to discuss spirituality and social work. We have a lot of people registered. Maybe you're seeing that from the chat. So apologies if we don't get to all of your questions. They are all very important and we will do our absolute best to get to them. Couple quick little housekeeping notes before I pass it on to Susan. If you are looking for that certificate of attendance today, don't worry, they get emailed once you've viewed the required viewing minutes. I believe for this presentation is between 40 or 60, depending on that, but you can check your course completion tracker just to make sure. Any issues with that, please just be in touch with us and we'll be happy to get that for you. This webinar will be recorded, so you can log back in on any time if you want and rewatch or share with your peers, or if you have to run and want to catch the tail end, you're welcome to log on for that on-demand version once the presentation has concluded. You can also always access your certificate of attendance on the on-demand version as well if you're having some issues, whether it's technical difficulties or what today, accessing that. There's also a widget called the Welcome and Housekeeping Notes that might have a couple little more information or details for you if you need it during the presentation. So feel free to check that out or chat or Q&A with us, and we'd be happy to troubleshoot you as best we can. As I mentioned, there's quite a few people online, so we'll do our best to get to all of those, but bear with us if it's a little bit busy today. You might want to check out some of those other widgets at the bottom there. We do have a Twitter function if you wanted to tweet about this event, as well as the speaker abstract the abstract and the speaker bio. So you can check those out if you're looking for a little bit more information about the presentation today, as well as the handout widget where you can check out our peer-to-peer support group that we have on Facebook and the slide presentation for today. So I'm so excited. I love how many people tuning in from the prairies, Ontario and Quebec. I'm just going to pump this so you can see where everyone's tuning in from. And I'm going to pass it on to Susan Cadell. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for your team to be here for this incredible opportunity, and take it away.
Alexandra. Good day, everyone. I am Susan Cadell. I am joining you from Kitchener, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabeg, and Haudenosaunee peoples, on the land that is called the Haldimand Tract that was promised to the Six Nations and does not fully belong to them. So welcome to everyone. So glad you can join us. I am a long-time member. Actually, I just calculated I've been a 20-year member of the Canadian Society for Social Work and Spirituality and Social Work. I always turn it around. And we are all the presenters today are members of the Society. And we are going to be, I'm going to be facilitating the panel, and everyone else is going to be presenting about various things, and I'll be coming on to do the Q&A. So what we have decided to do is we are talking to you today about spirituality and social work in general. We have 4 presenters, and each will take about 10 minutes. And then because they are presenting on different topics, we are going to take questions after each one of their presentations. And then we'll go on to the next presentation. And then at the end, we'll have some general Q&A and general discussion about the society. So in order, I'll just briefly tell you what order folks are going to be coming in. Our first presenter is Heather Boynton, and she's an assistant professor in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary. And Fiona Edwards is our second presenter, and she's a PhD candidate in social work at York University in Toronto, Canada. Cassandra Hanrahan is an associate professor at Dalhousie in Nova Scotia, and Indrani Margolin is an associate professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Northern British Columbia. So if you were keeping track, they're in 4 different time zones, and only one shares the same time zone with me, so I'm super impressed that we're all here, and I'm super excited to be listening to everyone today. And so without further ado, I will pass it over to Heather.
Thank you, Susan. I'm seeing the poll up and trying to get up my slide. Thank you for that great introduction. And I also will let you know that I am a 16-year member of the Canadian Society for Spirituality and Social Work, and this year have stepped up to be the vice president. And very excited to be able to communicate to you about spirituality. And my area of research is on children's spirituality. I will say, actually, I am, because of COVID, back in my hometown in Thunder Bay, and I'm presenting today for the traditional territory of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson-Superior Treaty of 1850, the homelands of the Anishinaabe and Métis people. So why did I choose to work and research in children's spirituality? Well, in my practice, I was encountering a lot of children and families who were having spiritual struggles. Many of the children were asking those big questions that we often ask in life. Things like, what is the meaning of life? Who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? What's the meaning of this trauma? Why would God let this happen to me? So all of these really difficult questions they were asking, and just human questions around our existence in the world. And what I also found was there was a lack of information, a lack of literature really in the area of children's spirituality, because I wanted to be making sure I was ethically working with the youth that I was working with, but it was difficult for me to find information. And what also was noted in the literature is that adults often don't recognize the spiritual capacities and the needs and the struggles of children. And that came out in my research as well, is that many of the parents were surprised by how their children were talking about spirituality. We also need to make sure that we have training for practitioners, because that came out as well, that there was a lack of training and need for more interventions and more information on how to go about spirituality in practice. So we need this in field education and in curriculum, and students need to be able to have the skills they need to further that work. We all have different definitions of spirituality, and there is an overlap between religion and spirituality. Some people might say that they're religious, others might say they're spiritual, some might say they're both, and some might say they're neither. And so I chose to use the definition by Michael Sheridan, which talks about a connectedness to oneself, to others, to a higher power, to nature, and beyond, which may or may not include religion. And I felt that was a good definition to use for interviewing children, parents, and clinicians. Some of the initial words that came out when I was asking participants about spirituality was that it was complicated and kind of messy, like it's hard to determine, and very multifaceted and complex. And that's really what came out for sure in the data. Here's the initial words of an 8-year-old, and you can see the depth in the children's responses. Spirituality means to me that you have to love someone in your life and be nice to them and be kind. My strong points are actually being nice to friends, trying to let them take their own actions, and also being kind. being you. Yes, being me is how you want to be. Life is the 4 elements. Life is the talent of healing. Life is believing in yourself. Life is loving yourself. But that's not all. She was very cute and very deep and philosophical. And Hercules also talked about really how spirituality involves all of us, all of our life and our being, that it occurs in various environments in which we engage, and that could be at home or playing hockey or singing in a choir or at school. And the spiritual experiences contribute to our wholeness as a spiritual human being. And it's the collective. And because that's kind of at the heart of spirituality, and the heart is really important in spirituality in the research that I did. And all of these aspects make up who we are as a person. So this looks very complicated. This was the model that came out of my research. I'm going to just highlight a few points, not go into it in depth. But children who experience trauma, grief, and loss, we know, if you look at the left-hand side, you know that from the grief and trauma literature, there's this sense of being struck blank or a sense of disbelief. But what was unique in the data and the participants' descriptions of what happened for them is that children seemed to be sparked and catapulted. So their activities, their spiritual activities and practices and rituals were sparked through trauma, grief, and loss, and they relied on their spirituality to get them through times of adversity. And they were catapulted in terms of thinking about the meaning of life, the meaning of events, beyond the level that you would expect for their development. And so if you look at some of the literature on spirituality and faith development, they were catapulted up in towards the adolescent range, and some aspects, even the adult range of development. So what also happens in trauma, grief, and loss is there's a dialectic. So spirituality is deemed to be very normal and important, especially in trauma, grief, and loss. And so individuals tend to go underground. So you can see that goes sort of, that arrow goes underground. On top, you'll see on the very top are these contextual and environmental aspects. So because of where I did the research, I noticed that there was information on things like the land, First Nations spirituality came out for individuals who actually weren't First Nations. They were adopting that type of approach. And so there's these sort of contextual time, space, environment aspects that were interwoven. But what was really critical was this deeming of spirituality and trauma, grief, and loss to be weird and taboo, things that you don't talk about, but also that they actually had experienced spiritual oppression in the sense that they had been bullied or ostracized, and their spirituality had been squashed in social settings, especially at school. And so that caused these processes in the middle. So they were engaging in things like fighting it out, both internally and externally, standing up for their rights, but internal battles. There was lacking trust in answers because they weren't able to, discuss things openly. For clinicians, it also was about lack of training. Treading cautiously was sort of navigating this rocky terrain and trying to figure out safe spaces where they might be able to talk about spirituality or express their spirituality or even the events of the trauma. Staying strong was about masking things or, trying to show that you're doing okay when maybe you're really not. And also it was about staying strong for others in the family. And for clinicians, it was about relying on their competence and the skills that they had. And then at one's own pace had to do again with sort of just sharing a little bit at a time or finding safe spaces or refuges to be able to express things. And so it's normal and important had so many categories and really demonstrated the strong spiritual foundations that children start to actually create for themselves. They felt that spirituality was something that you should choose on your own, and they were integrating aspects from school, from social media, from church events, from all different areas in their life and from family. And so there was all kinds of things like how they engaged and experienced spirituality, and having spiritual tendencies and abilities, so intuitive senses, things like hearing things, seeing things, knowing things, intuition. There was a lot of different activities that they engaged in, and they also embrace spiritually symbolic objects. So the grief literature talks about linking objects. When someone has died, people use things like a photo or a belonging to a person to connect. What I found with the objects, they weren't just objects that connected them to someone who had died, but they were things like rabbit's feet and weasel skins and all different things, and rocks that actually also connect them to another place and time where they felt really good. And so I deemed these to be spiritually symbolic objects because of this transcendent connection. And they really, really enjoyed talking about things, and they called them having weird thoughts and conversations. The word weird just kept coming up. And if you go to the dictionary, it talks about it being related to the magical, the supernatural, something that's odd. And often they talked about, there isn't enough words in the English language to describe our spiritual experiences. The other thing that was really critical was that the spirituality really resonated in terms of the heart connection. And it was connected to the heart and soul. And the other fascinating thing that I found with these children, even though they hadn't actually been taught this in their faith development or from parents, they believed in reincarnation. And they had some really great things to talk about how they surmised that. And so I really found that everybody was sort of navigating this area in seclusion because there wasn't much in society about it. And for clinicians, there wasn't any roadmaps or frameworks.
So one of the first processes that emerged was writing it out, and this had two dimensions. The first one
That's strange.
Internal battles, where people felt that they had to stand up for themselves and attempt to defend their rights for their individual and unique spirituality.
I'm not sure what was happening there, but anyway, so the weird and taboo really played out for individuals around, one of the participants talk about, you just have to wait and the archers will be there. And that, experiencing spirituality in social settings was very difficult. Bobby Boblehead talked about it being normal and important. So she said, I think it's pretty important in life when I'm appreciative of family, friends, animals, nature, sports, and anything like that. I find it easy to tell, especially. You can catch yourself doing it. I think that's the most fun because you don't even know until afterwards. I'm yeah, I was being spiritual there. And just a couple other quotes before we move on. So they talked about this joy, happiness, and butterflies and a feeling of excitedness in their stomach. So Jessie Mayer said, I'm pretty happy and excited. I feel that I cannot be touched in a hurtful way. I feel that I am just surrounded by happiness. It feels really spiritual. I feel kind of weird, a weird feeling of butterflies. It's a good happy. And here's Jessie Mayer also talking about having a conversation with me about God. I think if God created the world, did he create all the other planets? But who created him? Some person appears and it's oh, so you created the world, and it's they're almost invisible, like dust. So you created God and God created the world. Now, I wasn't quite sure. Was that someone other than God that created God? Or was that the part of God, someone else who created God? Because can God create himself somehow? It's a really good question. And so she's 9 thinking this. I also asked I asked all the participants what clinicians needed to know or what information they wanted to share. And Jessie Mayer said they just have to have their thought and their heart, that they know. And so she felt that all of us have this ability to connect, ability to understand, ability to talk about spirituality, and that we really just need to sort of open that space. And so opening safe space was really important for the participants. The children wanted spirituality as part of their counseling. Counselors were encountering it at different levels and finding the depth for children. And parents also really wanted it included because many of them talked about not being able to attend to their child's struggles or spiritual concerns because many of them were also involved in some way in the trauma, or even part of it. Maybe there was some that had been involved in substance use and difficult situations, and were just hoping that their child was getting their needs met through counseling. So it's quite an area that we really need to talk about and research further. And Indrani, Margolin, and myself just received some funding actually to explore children's spirituality in pre-adolescence and to look at gender. And we're hoping to expand that research nationally at some point. So we're pretty excited about getting started at that. And we just got the funding and just getting started. So stay tuned for that information later on. And I will leave it there.
Thanks, Heather. There we go. I am not seeing any questions in the question and answer or the chat box. If anybody wants to put up any questions for Heather, there'll be an opportunity later on as well. I wanted to thank you, Heather. I would love to hear more about spiritual bullying. I think, as someone raised outside of, a childhood raised outside of Christian church, I experienced that myself. So I felt that was very validating. And I'm just checking, not seeing any questions. So perhaps we will go on to there's a lot of thank yous in the chat, Heather, in case you're not seeing that. So I think I'm not the only one who felt validated by that. So let's move on to Fiona. And Fiona, you can introduce yourself a little bit more.
As a PhD candidate in the School of Social Work at York University, I am doing my research on the mental health experiences of Afro Caribbean Canadian youth. And these experiences also involve looking at their spiritual needs as well. So in my talk today, I would look at the impact of religiosity and spirituality in addressing the mental health experiences of youth from an Afro-Caribbean background. And that is basically Afro-Caribbean Canadian youth, that is youth born in Canada of Afro-Caribbean background. So to begin, I will share a little bit about my interest in spirituality, how it all gets started. So my interest in spirituality actually grew from my experience as a mental health practitioner, a researcher, and a Black woman. So as a mental health practitioner, I have been called upon to provide clients with spiritual counseling, especially when they have spirituality as part of their treatment goal. Also, being a person of faith, I thought it would be really easy to integrate spirituality in practice. However, what I found is that my social work education and training did not provide me with the knowledge and the practice skills to meet the spiritual needs of my clients. So keeping in line with social work, anti-oppression, social justice mandate, I believe it will be very useful for social workers working in youth mental health, where the dominant perspective is a biomedical model, to also incorporate a holistic lens. And that is by considering the spiritual dimension of a person's life. So I believe that integrating spirituality as a significant element in social work, education, and training, and not as an isolated one, can offer the profession the opportunity to engage in anti-oppressive practice to address the diverse needs of youth, including those from the Afro Caribbean background. And as a researcher exploring the mental health experience of Afro Caribbean Canadian youth, what I'm discovering is that parents and youth, they are turning to faith-based leaders, and they are also turning to mental health workers who are spiritual for support. However, based on the literature review, what I'm coming up with is that little is very known about the spiritual impact of the mental health experience of youth from the Afro-Caribbean community, and also their voices are very much missing in research due to the lack of research conducted with this population group. And also, speaking from my experience as a Black woman, I know that spirituality and religiosity is a big element of the Afro Caribbean community, because, and even Black people in general, because it provides a safe haven in the lives of Black people during period of racial oppression and various forms of injustice. So, what do we know about the Afro-Caribbean what do we know about Afro-Caribbean youth and mental health? So based on my research, these are some of the findings that are coming out from my research on Afro-Caribbean youth and mental health. Their mental health is not understood as mental health, but rather as behavior. They are diagnosed with behavioral problems such as ADHD, and this is impacting their schooling experiences in negative ways because they are being sent to behavioral classrooms. Also, parent-child conflict is also impacting their mental health experiences. Colorism, that is the desire to be lighter skinned. And I see that happening a lot in the female youth, Black female youth, because they know that society endorses lighter skin. And with lighter skin is like the privilege that comes with being at a lighter skin. So they do not like themselves. They prefer to be of a lighter complexion than being dark skinned. Racial stresses, including anti-Black racism in key institutions, are reported to impact the mental health and well-being of Afro-Caribbean Canadian youth. And we look at key institutions, we're looking at the criminal justice system, where they are overrepresented, where they are looked or labeled as criminals, suspicious, or even as bad people. And when it comes to the school, what I find the youth are telling me, their mental health is impacted by the school because they are streamed in low and applied classes. They are also the schools have very low expectations of them. They're expected to be rappers and athletes. They are also being talked to rather than being talked with in school, and they are faced with suspension and expulsion from school. And at that developmental stage, the youth are telling me that they are consciously aware of the racial identities and how it is viewed in society. And they are exploring their spiritual identity to cope with their racial identity and other challenges that they face in society where they feel like they're not good enough or they don't have high self-esteem, and they want to discover their true meaning and purpose in life. It is also important to know that my research, the youth that I interview, they were seeking mental health services and at the same time seeking spiritual supports to help them deal with their experience in society. So what do we understand by spirituality and religion? And I will use the definition that Kanda and Foreman assert. They look at spirituality. Their spirituality is referred to as a universal quality of human being and their culture related to the quest for meaning, purpose, morality, transcendence, well-being, and profound relationships with ourselves, others, and ultimate reality. Whereas religion is viewed as an institutional pattern of beliefs, behavior, and experiences, oriented towards spiritual concern, and shared by a community and transmitted over time in tradition. And also, when I looked at the Afro Caribbean youth and their views on spirituality, this is what they had to share. They look at spirituality as a personal journey, meaning that spirituality is subjective and means different things to different people based on their lived experiences. However, what I find was a common consensus is that this personal journey is about hope, to hope that the problem they are having, the challenges they are facing would soon go away. The youth were also able to link spirituality with religious activities. Developing a spiritual identity is linked to religious activities such as praying, fasting, attending church services, and participating in programs such as youth group or the youth ministry, which is offered by most churches for youth to have a voice, to build relationship, to have spiritual guidance, to be creative and explore their gifts and talents. This helped them to develop a strong sense of self-esteem. The youth also look at spirituality as a foundation of resilience. When faced with occurrence of racism and discrimination, the youth rely on scriptures in the Bible on overcoming hardships and adversities to cope and to hope for transformative changes to happen. It also gives them the willpower to not give up, but to keep going on regardless of the situation, to keep on living, to keep on hoping. The youth also see spirituality as meaning making. Here I also see that the youth and the parents, they are interpreting the youth experience from a spiritual lens to make sense of their lives, their purpose, and how to conduct themselves in the midst of adversities. And from the parents' perspective, who are also interviews along with mental health workers, the parents are saying that spirituality improves self-esteem and well-being, help the youth to develop a strong sense of self and to reject negative stereotypes. Teaching of spirituality helped the youth to embrace their unique qualities and to love themselves. And when it comes to social workers working in the field as mental health workers, they share that spirituality strengthens the therapeutic relationship when both the client and the workers can relate on this level. So when we look at the inclusion of spirituality in social work, this is an area that I find that is somewhat lacking. So I will contend that the inclusion of spirituality in social work curriculum can better prepare social workers to work holistically with clients from diverse backgrounds. So the inclusion of religion and spirituality in social work curriculum could lead to an integration of theory and practice. Such can provide numerous perspectives of how people and their communities, they act, they behave, they interpret their world, and also express themselves. And as social workers, we work with people from multi-faith and multicultural, and being exposed to their knowledge about their spiritual lives can really create a comfortable space for social workers and mental health practitioners to address spirituality when it is presented in practice. When we look at the inclusion of spirituality in social work curriculum, this can enhance students and social workers' practice knowledge and skills, because a lack of education and training in the area of spirituality in social work can raise concern about ethical guidelines when spiritual intervention is used in practice. So practitioners who want to practice from a spiritual lens with limited knowledge may likely run the risk of violating ethical codes of practice. The inclusion of religion and spirituality in social work would also foster a holistic approach, because completing needs assessment is an important aspect of the work that social work do and also social work practice. Therefore, the tools that are used for assessing clients should also use to assess the spiritual well-being as well. So recommendations for inclusion of spirituality in social work includes supports and training for educators. This is to help them build curriculum on spirituality. This social work students should have access to courses on religion and spirituality. This can be done by teaching courses on spirituality and religion, or having specialized program on this topic. And also something that I find as also part of my work as a mental health first aid instructor, one of the things that I do is to travel within the faith-based community and deliver mental health training so that faith-based leaders are aware of what are the presenting the common mental health challenges youth face and how they can tailor to the needs of youth from a spiritual perspective. So I also believe when it comes to field education and practicum, I think partnership with faith-based leaders and spiritual leaders can be very helpful for the professional social work so that social workers can learn more about spirituality and religion, which can be useful when we're working with clients who adhere to different faith and different spiritual well-being. My research at the time is still ongoing, but the findings that I am coming up with, spirituality is an area that needs to be researched within the Black community, because what we do know, there's a lot of research when it comes to adults and spirituality and race. But when it comes to Black youth, their experience is more or less missing. So as my research continue, I hope that I'll be able to share more of my findings so that Black youth from the Afro Caribbean community can have a voice so that we can know what the spiritual experience mean to them and how they navigate the different challenges they face in society to not only improve their mental health, but to develop a strong identity that could enhance the self-esteem and who they are in society. This is my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Suzanne, back to you.
Thank you, Fiona. That was wonderful. I can't wait to hear more about your research as you finish your PhD and go into changing social work education. I really look forward to that. There's lots of comments going on. There is lots of positive feedback. There are some general questions in the Q&A that I'll come back to after the fact, and one for Heather. But there was one that I thought you might want to address, Fiona, in terms of there's a comment about someone has written, I want to understand why people believe that Afro Caribbean experience is homogeneous. Some people don't know how to separate spirituality and religion, and poorly educated parents struggle with youth that want to develop in Canadian society without the yoke of Christianity. How do we cross that divide when religion dominates? I'm not sure if you want to address that, or it's not really a question, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity.
I'll think about it.
Okay. So we will have time at the end if you want to give that some thought and come back to address that. And maybe I would invite also that person to develop that into more of a question if it is. But okay. Is there at this point? Again, there's also a comment, lots of positive comments, and one particularly about working with faith leaders that you'll want to have a look at, Fiona. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. So we can go on to Cassandra to present.
Hi everyone, my name is Cassandra, and I'm joining you from Halifax, the traditional home of the As Susan mentioned in her introductory words, I'm an associate professor and researcher at the Dalhousie School of Social Work in Halifax. And my research is on animal-informed social work. And on animal-informed social work, with the aim to reconceptualize social work today by primarily broadening the scope of compassion and incorporating sustainability as a core value. So what I want to talk to you about today is this idea of trans-species spirituality. Yeah. And this is a notion that I coined back in, in 2016 in a paper that you can see here up on the screen on the right, that I called being different with different beings, social work and trans-species spirituality. And this was for a book called Practicing Spirituality, Reflections on Meaning Making and Personal Intersectional Context. And that's the other portion of the screen. And that was a book that was edited by Dr. Laura Perez, also a longtime member of Canadian Society of Spirituality and Social Work, and she's at Western College. And the reason I mention this paper, and this is a starting point for this talk, because writing this paper was...
Sorry, Cassandra, can you hear me? You're just a little bit low. I just want to, your presentation is so important, so I want to make sure that we have your audio up. So it's just a little bit low right now. Can you try just speaking a little bit closer to your microphone, and we'll see if that helps?
Okay, how is it now?
A little bit of feedback there. Hold on. Alrighty, can you give me one more test there?
Is this better? Hello, hello?
Much better. Yes,
okay,
much
I'll
better.
Go with, okay, fine. Thanks. Thank you for alerting me to that. Okay, so the reason I mentioned this paper as a starting point is because it really was a pivotal experience for me, because it was the first opportunity that I had to articulate the relationship between human-animal interactions, especially the bonds, human-animal bonds and benefits, and my own spirituality. And this was something that had become increasingly important to do, because the relationship and the experiences that I've had with companion animals and in various environments, I gradually knew to be profoundly influential on me, epiphanic really. And I also had a sense that they were sort of important beyond myself. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a few minutes. But understanding and being concerned with animal-human interactions is simply not the preoccupation of sort of quote unquote an animal lover, which is how these things are sometimes disparagingly characterized. Not as much today, because really things are changing rapidly in the last 6 years to present. But when I started this work, 12, 15 years ago, that was very much the case. And, Heather mentioned sort of the weird and taboo and spiritual oppression. And I have done a lot of thinking around that, because certainly that was my experience when I started out in this field, and others, other kindred spirits too in this area. We talked about moral injury and the sort of pathologizing of people who felt kindred with other species. But what I want to say to you is that the study and the concern with human-animal interactions really is about ideas threaded together with hope and aspirations, with faith in my case, that connect my personal and personal worlds into a life that's guided by spiritual lessons, learned, really. The primary source of those learnings that I had for a better world really came from my daily interactions with the companion animals that I've had over the years, and with the more than human world, including other species, of course, companion animals, but also other wildlife like roadkill, just coming upon that and how I would feel, and thinking about those born into the industrial food complex and those used in experimentation daily. All of them. And the world we co-inhabit, impacted by my choices, my actions, my inactions regarding the foods, the products, the services I purchase, I consume, and I endorse. So understanding and being concerned with human-animal interactions render me quite profoundly into a nexus of becoming, beyond the self, beyond species, to what I like to think of as more hopeful places of ethical relationality. And in the professional realm, to what I think is a more sustainable paradigm for social work. And it's political, it's personal, but and it puts at the center a concept or a value of sustainability. Till I was invited to write this paper, which what became a chapter in the book I mentioned, Being Different with Different Beings, there had been very little professional space for me to explore these ideas, how my spirituality and professional self really are buoyed or sustained by an affinity with the more than human world. And to have the space to affirm this affinity more than anything else, and to have the space to affirm that this affinity, more than anything else, was that which informs and deepens my sense of connectedness, my sense of interconnectedness with humanity within and as part of the more than human world. And given that intersectionality, interconnectedness is so vital to the work that we do in social work, it seemed to me I had to explore this. So the opportunity of this webinar today to be with all of you, as I noted in my chapter, the idea of having this designated public space to delineate some of these ideas, to have this conversation, is most welcome and also most remarkable. And it's remarkable because spirituality, as we've already heard from Heather and Fiona particularly, and human-animal interactions and environments are not part of social work core program content for curriculum in the standards of accreditation. We don't teach these topics, generally speaking. They're not in the core curriculum. So if they're being taught, it's typically as independent studies or as electives. And yet, like myself, human-animal interactions and human-animal bonds resonate readily for so many, and in so many ways across the lifespan. People who experience a range of benefits like companionship, non-judgmental presence, and unconditional love, which can increase confidence and self-esteem in their people and their humans. The ways that animals can help with social isolation and loneliness, particularly true for anyone who lives alone or is otherwise socially isolated, the elderly, the aged, those living with a chronic condition that limits their mobility and the ability to socialize. Benefits around how companion animals can also increase opportunities for socialization, getting people outside, encouraging exercise and activity, how they help reduce stress, and generally just make us feel happier and healthier and more resilient. Simply, we have empirical evidence that simply stroking an animal, looking at them, looking at pictures, produces many happy hormones like dopamine and endorphins, which produce physical and psychological benefits. Yet, ironically, given all that, and also too, while social work rapidly, and I use that word as a pun, promotes person in context, that's a long-standing paradigm. We promote anti-oppression, we promote intersectionality, and we do all of this without any critique of the profession's very philosophical foundation of humanism. And humanism not only normalizes human privilege and invisibilizes, I like to say, its corollary of speciesism, which is basically a form of discrimination based on species difference, but it does so to the level of an anthroparchy. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that concept, anthroparchy is basically a social system of attitudes, practices, and institutions through which the natural world is dominated to the benefit of humans. This term was one that was coined back in 2005 by a psychologist, Erica Cudworth, in ecofeminist as well, in looking at her the complexities of difference in a paper called that. Anyway, humanism also promotes the human being, but not all people as the measure of all things. So what kind of human being? And this is something that many critical anti-oppressive social workers spend a lot of time thinking about and unpacking. But it also promotes and reproduces the differential power relations and dynamics that manifest in so many of the very issues that social workers work so hard to dismantle. like racism, sexism, and so many other issues. But setting aside the philosophical and the theoretical, in terms of practice, we don't teach even about animal-assisted interventions and therapies that also have benefits for people in the ways that I just mentioned above. We don't include natural discussions around natural environments, and when the latter is being mentioned at all, it's done so in a very limited way, largely limited to people's social networks. So environments mean social networks. They don't mean the natural environment and the actual earth and land and sky. And they sometimes, but to a much lesser extent, refer to built environments. But even those are reduced to static, determinate resources with no thought to regenerative dynamics. Which is something that actually a radical or progressive architects are thinking about today in terms of radical or regenerative dynamic architecture. Anyway, so all of this to me is even more surprising given the unprecedented groundswell of popular and academic interest in human-animal interactions and our shared environments across the academy and across numerous other professions as well, like the law. In fact, human-animal interactions or critical animal studies is thought to be today the fastest, newest sort of academic field. It's growing tremendously. But yet social work is one of the few disciplines that doesn't incorporate human-animal interactions. And this to me is very surprising. And as I said, part of the consternation is around social work's emphasis on intersectionality as a core concept. And because of its orientation towards justice, towards a history of eclecticism, we already have several theoretical models in practice, such as strengths-based perspectives, ecosystems theory, family systems theory, which would further support an expansion of the circle of compassion, the circle of consideration beyond people. So for about a few mere scholars, really, in Canada and practitioners, myself being one, advancing human-animal interactions and bonds and social work is still sort of at the fledgling state. It is. I think we are poised now, though I'm happy to say, I think for exciting things to happen in the very near future. But this topic does enjoy extraordinary attention elsewhere, in the United States, surprisingly, and many other countries across the world. So I just wanted to point that out before moving on. I want to say now a few words about spirituality and religion in social work. So while not altogether absent from the profession, religion and spirituality too are at best, I would say, treated as peripheral to the profession of social work. We just heard Fiona talking about how we don't receive training for incorporating spirituality into practice, and how significant spirituality and religion is for many of the youth that she spoke to, and same with Heather. So while we care about it, and that's been my experience with many colleagues and with people, clients and practitioners in the field, human-animal interactions tends to resonate on so many levels for so many, but yet in terms of our education and our training, we don't do it. I want to just look at the slide. And so the profession's ethical foundation and value system, which were previously grounded in religion and spirituality, were reconstructed using the tenets of empiricism, secular humanism, medical science, and libertarian morality. And there were reasons for this shift. However, throughout this period of secularization within the profession, the realm of the spirituality really became external to social work and was really dropped off the radar, rather than being seen, as we've heard, as a potentially complementary, even vital dimension to the physiological, to the psychological and social fears of a person's development. which basically make up the scope of our professional practice. But with that said, following this extended period of secularization, the topic of spirituality and social work have enjoyed a renewed interest in North America, approximately since the mid-'80s. So people like John Graham, Diana Kahalik, Groen Crisp in the UK, Holloway and Moss, Edward Kanda in the US, John Coates in New Brunswick, Brian Willett in New Brunswick, and so many others shared in, as we heard from about. So there are many people now thinking about, and as we've heard from Heather and Fiona, thinking about spirituality and social work. So just continuing then, a spiritually sensitive practice is considered a strengths-based approach that explores spirituality and religion both as a potential source of resilience, but also as a source of trauma, as a potential barrier to a person's growth. And I think this is very important. And this quote I refer to often, the one I have up on the screen, because I think it really gets to the heart of it. So it comes from Clay Graybill, who works from a strengths-based approach, but he talks about the heart of a person's sense-making. So he says that for most persons, they see themselves as a complex constellation of qualities with many dimensions, some known, some not. All humans are influenced by and exist with at least 4 major dimensions: biological, psychological, social, and spiritual. Most theories of practice, even in social work, emphasize the first 2, and traditional assessment practices, especially the DSM, give little or no credence to the latter 2, that being social and spiritual. But interestingly enough, it's in those spheres, the social and the spiritual dimensions, that the substance of a person's lives are played out or lived out. That is where meaning is constructed and relationships developed. And I think this is true. This resonates very, very deeply with me. So proponents of an expanded biopsychosocial spiritual scope and practice in social work argue that as we adopt a more holistic and anti-oppressive model of practice, we can no longer ignore the spiritual dimensions, which for many, as we've heard, and also as it was suggested by Edward Kanda back in the late 80s, is really at the heart of a person's sense-making. And I believe the same can be said for human-animal interactions, for expanding our scope of compassion, our scope of consideration, to think about other species, other animals, and also the environments that we co-inhabit. And I think this can't be more true than in the current moment of COVID-19, which, as many of you already know, probably was in fact started by a zoonotic disease, a disease transmissible across species from non-human animals and people. And yeah.
Cassandra, just to give you a heads up, you're at 19 minutes.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'll just wrap it up then. So I just, can I have a few more minutes? Well, I didn't
Go
realize
ahead.
that. Okay, so basically, still though, there are some questions around what do animals have to do with social work, with spirituality, and even more to the point with both. And it was these questions that I endeavored to address in that chapter that I mentioned and that I'm trying to get at here today. So the questions regarding then a trans-species spirituality, I would say more accurately, are what do animals other than people have to do with social work? And if reason and truths, a big capital T truths, can't move people to action, then what roles do spirituality, ceremony, sentiment, other religious activities, sensation, what do these things, what roles may they have in bringing people into awareness of action and of action? So I guess I'll make this my last slide. I just want to say that my use of the term trans-species spirituality is closely based on the conceptual reasoning behind Dr. Gabe Bradshaw's concept of trans-species psychology. She's an American psychologist and ecologist and director of the Carolus Center for Nonviolence. And as you can see, she talks about trans as a concept that re-embeds the human into a larger matrix of the sort of the web of life. And she goes on to talk in her work. She does talk about the terms trans and species, really designate a new paradigm for thinking, and one that I concur with, that including the health professions, where humanity is really challenged to rethink almost every aspect of modern culture, of traditional cultures, and how we are charged with the recreation of ethics and reasons and ways of knowledge making that reflect an understanding that animals are fully sentient beings. So understood that as a paradigm shift, I would put to you that as society moves away from this, from the Cartesian frame, we are today, also in this era of global pandemics, we are faced with a rediscovery and a need for reinventing human identity. And I would say to you that there's no better place to rediscover and reinvent the rich topography of spirit, all of these ideas than in this rich topography of spirituality, where people strive to make meaning and make sense of life's events. So thank you for listening, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Cassandra. There's lots of positive comments, lots of resonance in the chat, and particularly some comments about the importance of understanding grief and loss around companion animals, and so your talk is clearly resonating with folks. I'm going to go on. There's lots of questions, general questions that we'll come back to, but I think we'll go on to Indrani to do her presentation, and then we'll have some general questions and answers.
Thanks, Susan. How do I bring up my PowerPoint slide? I'm just not seeing it. There we go. Thanks. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here with you all and presenting with my fabulous co-presenters. I'm going to chat with you about meditation as a trauma-informed practice today as an aspect of spiritual social work. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I gratefully acknowledge the unceded and traditional territories of the Lheidli T'enneh, on which UNBC stands where I work. And I'd also like to acknowledge the territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations of the Coast Salish people where I live. To introduce myself a little bit, I'm an associate professor at the University of Northern British Columbia. I am part of a leadership team of Northern FIRE, which stands for Feminist Institute for Research and Evaluation. I'm also part of the board, and I'm also working on a business on the side called Ancient Secrets Path, where I'm looking to support other helping professionals in their wellness, given this challenging time of the pandemic. My research and teaching really focuses on consciousness and meditation, holistic social work practice, including expressive arts therapy, girls and women's wellness, and social worker wellness. I'm going to chat with you today about what spirit and spirituality are from my perspective and the power of this paradigm, and then what it means to turn inward with meditation and how that is a trauma-informed practice, and then provide some brief research findings from my work. So spirit and spirituality, I really like Canda's definition of how spirituality is about engaging a sense of transcendence, experienced by people individually as deeply profound, sacred, or transpersonal. And I'm interested in what that sacredness is that is most fundamental to our humanity and our spirituality. The universe is a spiral movement. Spiritual spirituality comes from spiral, which is spiral. The whole physical universe is a spiral movement, from the fetus of the baby to a seed, to the flower, from the nebula to the galaxy. It's a body of vortices or whirlpools. And even in our breath, we inhale in vortice and we exhale in vortice. All our movements are moving in spiral. Spirituality is also, in Latin, spiritus is I breathe. The word spirit actually means I breathe, and many languages highlight and emphasize this. It is pneuma in Greek and ruach in Hebrew, and swas, which becomes saswatam in Sanskrit, which means eternal. So everything that's living is breathing, including a stone. And this, to me, is the essence of our spirit and spirituality. This is how everything connects through breath. And this is the spirit. So spirituality, it's not anything we have to do. We just are spiritual just by breathing. But bringing awareness to this consciously, spirituality is our journey, our conscious journey from our understanding, from individuality to our unity. And that's the perspective I like to focus on. The potency of a spiritual paradigm is that it provides a holistic, strength-based perspective from which to view the trajectory of suffering or trauma. From a transpersonal perspective, trauma can cyclically prepare individuals and groups for psychological and spiritual transformation. While it's never an experience that anyone would invite, and the pain has to be treated with incredible compassion, it is also, from a positive perspective, can provide psychological growth. Post-traumatic growth was coined by Tedeschi and Calhoun. And they talk about how the growth is directly attributed to the toil. In much research, and they certainly weren't the first ones, this is evidence throughout spiritual and religious and philosophical traditions, that much of our growth comes out specifically from our trauma and pain, because it creates an opening. The word crisis, the etymology of it actually means turning point. It creates an opening to create something new and fosters our creativity to strive for and seek for what we truly desire in our heart. So I really like meditation as a practice to support this receptivity that trauma also can encourage, because the heightened awareness of impermanency, which often people feel in experiences of grief and loss, can create this receptivity. And meditation aligns so nicely as a practice. It has existed for thousands of years throughout many traditions around the world. And the meditation system that I focus on comes from Vedic philosophy, and it comes directly out of the Vedas and the practices, it's called Mahavakya meditation. And this intervention that existed for thousands of years was really used and prescribed for these experiences, for self-understanding through suffering and pain, and to increase self-reliance and realization. The practices, the proclamations, actually are 4 different words that come from Vedas that span centuries, but they were put together recently by master teacher Tulsi Sen, who's also an author and comes from the business world, to support easier access to this system and help people use it on a day-to-day basis who are busy and through our lives, not just leaving on the side of our lives at an altar, which is also important, but this practice is meant to be used in process. And that's why I like it so much for its application in social work practice. The purpose of these meditations is to identify the individual consciousness with universal consciousness. So for example, prajnanam brahma means consciousness is creator. This constant affirmation infuses the meditator with the idea that the conscious universe, this whole universe, is not a blind mechanical system. It is a conscious, brilliant intelligence at work all the time. And that intelligence is made of the same stuff as our own awareness. And the metaphor that's often used is like a drop in the ocean and the ocean. We feel like we are just drops, but we are actually infused in the entire ocean and have the same power and made of the same creative substance as that ocean. And when we do this, a vibratory transformation occurs that can liberate our mind and help us believe in that. The scorpion and the frog is a perfect illustration. It's a story from ancient times and indigenous practices across Asia that depicts the experience between consciousness and that critical voice of judgment that we all face moment by moment throughout our lives that is so challenging. And what meditation does is that it allows that frog, our consciousness, to dive deep and avert the sting of the scorpion, which in its instincts, it cannot help, like our critical thinking that is just submerged in our past pains and our worries and our fears. Meditation helps us go around that and avoid that sting, but still to carry the scorpion to the other side of the riverbank on the water, because we live with our mind every moment. We cannot change that. And this is just an image, again, as the way meditation slowly works, like the stalactite and stalagmite in caves, just with every utterance of a proclamation, prajnanam brahma, just slowly, drip by drip, until it creates one channel. And this practice, with the understanding and repetition, it allows a person to integrate the meaning into their understanding of themselves. And in that process, they can begin to replace remorse, regret, guilt, and shame, embarrassment with grooves of thought of elation and forgiveness. So we form new thought with new habit and new self. It's a trauma-informed practice because it does not require clients to directly revisit the traumatic material, like many holistic practices. So I'm going to be finishing in a moment. I see I'm at my time. And reflection on this meditation really helps reduce the risk of re-traumatization. So I put it forward to add to practitioners' toolkit. These are some of the research findings. I've done many studies with students and social workers. These are some of the findings that they experience. And this is just an image one of my students did from this experience. And I'll just leave you with this thought. The butterfly emerges directly from the imaginal cells of the cocoon-destroyed caterpillar. And I love that photo. The butterfly is saying that's an old photo of the caterpillar. And thank you for listening. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions or comments.
I like the butterfly and the old photo. I hadn't seen that one before. That gave me a good chuckle. Thank you, Indrani. So many positive comments in the chat. This lots and lots and lots of resonance with your wow. Okay. One of the things that I think that I would suggest that we collectively do is put together a page of resources that can be distributed after the fact. There are some requests for resources, and I think that we collectively have a lot of those, so we can get that circulated after the fact. So I do want to come back specifically to a quick question for Heather, because I think she can answer this one quickly, about how many participants you had in your children's research, Heather?
Yeah, great question. It was a constructivist theory, qualitative research, constructivist qualitative research study. So I had 6 children, 5 female, 1 male. I had 5 parents and 7 clinicians, 5 female and 2 male.
Thanks. Fiona, have you had a chance to think of an answer to the question? There was someone else who was really curious to get you to comment on the Afro Caribbean experience being homogeneous. I think you might be muted, Fiona.
I was actually muted. So sorry about that. So when it comes to Afro Caribbean, it's not a homogeneous category, because within the Afro Caribbean community, you have people from countries like Jamaica, Antigua, Grenada, Trinidad, and sometimes the culture among these different countries is somewhat similar, but it's also different. The ethnicity could be different in some regards. So in essence, when we talk about Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean, we have to think about it as a heterogeneous category because of the different countries that makes up the Caribbean region. And the cultures might be different, the way of life they might be different. Like, for example, in my the country that I'm from, which is basically Grenada, mostly half of the populations is Christian. More than half of the population is Christian when it comes to their religious affiliation. And when you go to other places, it might look differently. So again, it's like recognizing that diversity within the Afro-Caribbean community and recognizing that rather than treating them as a homogeneous group. Also, when it comes to Black people in general, come from different countries on different continents and so forth. So I hope this addressed the question.
Thank you, Fiona.
Okay.
There's a question about. There's a couple of questions that are similar in terms of spirituality, defining spirituality with and without religion, and also about a social worker's personal worldview and how that influences. And I personally would invite any number of you to invite all of you to join our society, because that's the kind of question that we grapple with all the time. So, those are really important questions, and that I think our Canadian Society for Spirituality and Social Work is the place to kind of seek those answers and to gain the level of education that we all know is not happening in our schools of social work. We all would like there to be more. So does anyone else want to make any comments about the society? Cassandra is the current president, and Heather is the co-president. Do one of you want to address anything about the society?
Yeah, I would just want to say a few words on that. Thanks, Susan. So just to reiterate Susan's encouragement to join the society, Heather and I are really excited to be leading this initiative sort of after a bit of a hiatus for the society in the past couple of years. That really was a result of a number of factors, but really more than anything, a transition from sort of the old guard or sort of the original nucleus of people that started things up so many years ago, and then the pandemic happened, and so. but now we're basically up and running, and you'll probably be hearing a lot from us in the coming year. We have a leadership team that consists of Heather and I and a treasurer, but we're also looking, there's a vacancy for someone for the secretary role, and we have a board, and we're looking to recruit also members to our board. So you'll be seeing calls in the very soon for joining the application process for joining the board, and also for joining the society. So I invite you to look at our website. If you type in Canadian Society for Spirituality and Social Work.ca, you should find it there. And we are most of the site is good to go. We are adding to it every day and updating things, so it will be changing. But yeah, it's an exciting time, and we are basically just we're national in scope, but we're also international. In past years, when I joined the society back in 2009 and 10. We would have a face-to-face conference every other year, and we will be moving towards that again. We're just waiting for the pandemic to subside to return to our face-to-face conference. But it is also an international group. The society attracts many members from across the globe, all people interested in bringing the study of spirituality and religion through into the fore, through research, through scholarship, through practice, through workshops, and so on. So have a look at our website, and hope to have as many of you join as possible. It's great to be here today. Heather, did you want to add anything?
And I would add to ask you to address whether there's a cost to membership.
Go ahead, Heather, if you want.
Sure. We're just in the process of determining costs for membership, and we are negotiating with the International Journal of Spirituality, or Religion and Spirituality, to have that as a perk of being a member. And so for this year, because of the pandemic and other things, we are having membership as complimentary, and there will be a small fee in future just to help with things, overhead costs and things like that. And we hope to keep it reasonable for people. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that we also really invite interprofessional conversations and research too. And we also are very connected with the American Society in Spirituality and Social Work, and alternate conferences typically year to year, like from Canada to the US. They will be having a conference that I'm actually presenting more of my research at in June on the 6th, I think it's 16th, 17th, and 18th. And they will be honoring Ed Kanda, who's what we would deem one of the gurus of spirituality and social work. He's been, since 1988, has been working in this area, wonderful man. And they will be honoring him at that conference. So if you're interested, you can go to the American Society. Just, they are a good partner of ours, and it also gives you a chance to see, get to know people across the world, and lovely people who are really embracing spirituality and social work. And you'll find openness in conversations. And I just felt like I'd come home to my people when I joined the society and attended conferences. So I would encourage you to do that.
Yeah, and being being a longtime member, I would repeat that encouragement. And we really want to expand into all viewpoints, and keep expanding and understanding one another, and bringing that to social work education. Heather, do you want to put a link to that conference that you just discussed in the chat? And we can also put it in the resources. That's come up.
Sure.
And yeah, I don't think there's anything else that I think we want to address, and I'm not seeing further yeah, I think we've covered everything, and if we send along a few more resources, that we will have covered off everything that has come up. I personally would like to thank the four of you for doing this. It was almost like a little teaser into these different aspects of spirituality, but that's one of the things about the society, is that we all bring different lenses to this, and it was really for me, it was really refreshing to hear everybody's different approaches, and to hear a little bit more about each one. But clearly, there's more to be heard, and there's many more voices in the society. But thank you to each one of you for presenting that which you did today, and we will follow up with resources. And is there anything else that we need to do, Alexandra?
No, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of our presenters, as well as a huge thank you to Susan for moderating this session. It was absolutely wonderful to have those little, exactly like Susan said, tidbits of information. I feel like there could be, 15 more webinars to happen on everyone's different topics. For anyone attending, thank you so much for attending. This video will be on demand in about an hour after the presentation has concluded. Your certificate of attendance, again, can be accessed anytime, and we do have the contact information for our incredible presenters up right now. You can access that again. If you wanted a copy of the slides from today's presentation, you can go into the handout widget. Once Susan and the team compile that list of resources, you can watch your email. We'll send you a follow-up email following today's presentation with just some additional resources. But again, you can log back on anytime. Any final comments from the presenters before we sign off today?
Just a couple of words. I just want to say thank you to all of the attendees. Really wonderful to see all of your names there in the chat, and thank you for your comments and encouragement and questions. And yes, part of the conceptualization behind this webinar was to, as Susan says, provide a bit of a teaser for the array of topics and subject matter that members of the society address. So I hope, I think you can see in what you heard here this afternoon, the diversity of ideas, but united by enthusiasm and interest and and faith, I would say, even though they have different manifestations. But that was part of the goal of today's webinar, was to give folks an idea that indeed all are welcome all the time. And so thank you again to all the my co-presenters, the organizers, and all of the attendees.
And I will also just add quickly that we will be putting on some webinars and a spirituality symposium likely in the fall. So stay tuned for those events.
Amazing. Well, with that, we will wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone, and we will see you at the next CSW webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye.